While I've always been a bit more goth than punk, I've often said that I have quite punk sensibilities. Central to that being that I'm very DIY, and let's just say I'm not a massive fan of the establishment. As a genre, punk started in the late 70s and was a response to the more antiquated, manufactured music that was popular at the time, namely disco. Punk was edgy and counterculture, and it really wasn't even about being the best musician in the world. It was about being disruptive, and sometimes that's enough. The Misfits are one of American punk's most iconic bands of all time. And recently, Drunk Elvis, I mean Glenn Danzig, had some interesting things to say about punk in 2021. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Danzig was asked about the band's song Last Caress, which is honestly one of my favorite Misfits songs, but you know, it does include lyrics about killing babies and sexually assaulting mothers, so there's that, I guess. In his interview, he said that that song wouldn't fly these days because of so-called woke bullshit and cancel culture, saying,
"You could never have it. It would never have happened. We're lucky it happened when it did because it'll never happen again. You won't have any of those kinds of bands ever again. Everyone's so uptight and PC. It's just like, okay, whatever."
And by it, he means punk. To be frank, I found this comment to be quite interesting because while I think that we are really far divorced from the political climate of the 1970s that gave birth to the punk movement, I don't know if we've ever lived in a time where we've been more encouraged to create art that stands up against the establishment, which is kind of what punk is all about. So what are we really talking about here? So I thought that I would take this opportunity to have a conversation with you guys about cancel culture, because I know a lot of you guys have been asking me how I feel about it. So let's use this as a jumping off point, I guess. Firstly, there are some people who say that cancel culture doesn't exist because people are never really canceled. When I think about this, I think about Jeffree Star, who I've made several videos about. He said some really viciously racist stuff in his past. That stuff got resurfaced and it was fodder for social media conversation for months and months and months on end, but he still has 17 million subscribers, and there's not a video on his channel that doesn't get at least 1 million views. On top of all of that, he's still putting out new makeup. So this idea that a couple of bloggers talking about him got him canceled, to me at least, is a bit silly. And on the other side, we have people who say that cancel culture is very, very real. For example, the situation where Gina Carano posted a couple of really questionable things on her Twitter, like comparing being a conservative to being Jewish in Nazi Germany. That's gonna be a yikes from me, bro. And these posts and many other things that she posted on Twitter got her fired from her job on The Mandalorian, where she played a character called Cara Dune. But she got a job working for Ben Shapiro, so, you know, like, on to bigger and better things, I guess. But Jeffree Star and Gina Carano are F-list celebrities. What about Z-list celebrities like Central Park Karen, a white woman who went viral when she called the cops on a black man who asked her to put a leash on her dog? And on her phone call to the cops, she lied and said that the black man was physically attacking her. And of course, this was all caught on camera and it went viral, and it ultimately led to her losing her job. Hashtag canceled, I guess. It truly could not have happened to a nicer woman. Now, you guys know that I try my best not to see things in black or white. Instead, I tend to see things in undulating shades of gray, right? But when I look at the situations that I just listed, it's hard for me not to see that what a lot of people define as cancel culture is public criticism that leads to somebody's livelihood being lost. And when I recontextualize that with what Danzig is saying here, the math isn't really mathematizing. And in this interview with Rolling Stones, Danzig basically admits that Last Caress is basically just an edgelord song. He says,
"It's just a crazy ass song. We would do things just to piss people off."
And to me, when I hear rants like this, it honestly just sounds like people complaining about the fact that they can't say offensive things and also be mainstream enough to be paid for it, which is kind of an interesting position for a punk musician to take. But you know what? Glenn Danzig grew up to be a rich guy, so I think maybe he lost some perspective here, and I'm here to give him a little bit of that. Believe it or not, back in 1980, when the Beware EP was put out, Last Caress was not pop music. It was not mainstream. It was not played on the radio so that it could be dissected and critiqued by the mainstream. That was kind of the point. If you wanted to get a copy of the Beware EP or you wanted to find that single, you had to go to like a shitty record store in the bad part of town to find a copy of the actual song. It was not something that was made to be digested by the mainstream. It was not dissected and critiqued by the mainstream, which apparently is how we're defining cancel culture. On the flip side, Queen's Another One Bites the Dust, which was the top song of the year, was heavily criticized by the media for having hidden satanic messages that apparently encourage kids to smoke weed. And I may have to listen to that after I finish filming this video. My point is that usually when people are canceled, it's because they're famous or they went viral for X reason or another. And what it sounds like people are lamenting is the fact that they can't be popular or known without being criticized. What I think people are lamenting more than anything is the fact that the internet makes these criticisms more visible. And frankly, I can't even fathom a punk musician giving a fuck. Because if it was about the music, you would just make the music instead of complaining that it's too offensive for people to hear it, right? But I don't think it's about the music for a lot of people who make this complaint. It's about the fame, and I honestly think that that's kind of an odd goal for a punk band to have. Secondly, and this is really aggravating, woke does not mean what so many people seem to think it means. Woke is an incredibly overused term, yes, but it started as a term that would describe Black folks speaking to other Black folks about the realities of systemic racism. It was about educating other Black people about what it's like to be Black in America. For example, it's being aware of the fact that white women like the Central Park Karen exist and will weaponize their white womanhood in order to encourage the cops to use lethal force against a Black man because they can. Look, I respect that the word has been overused and that because of that, it's lost a lot of their meaning. But I've really never met somebody who disliked the word woke, who either didn't understand it or just kind of thought that like this whole racism thing wasn't a big deal. Look, let me level with you guys. I find white men talking about cancel culture to be highly entertaining because of how detached from reality it often is. I've talked quite frequently on this channel about the times in my life where I have adjusted myself so that I could be treated with more respect, right? And so frequently part of doing that is swallowing racism and sexism and transphobia and misogyny and all these other just shitty isms so that I can just like not be hurt, you know? And I've done this so much in my life, so much to the point where it's like I switch on, you know, a sort of persona in certain spaces just so that I get respected, right? And with that being my reality, it's really funny listening to white men complain about the fact that they can't sing about killing babies without the PC police getting called. Now, this is gonna sound terrible, but in the pre-pandemic times, I loved going to live comedy, not because I like laughing at funny jokes, but because I really enjoy watching people bomb. I know that probably makes me sound like a bad person, but I'm a public speaker and there's just something so cathartic and identifiable about being in a comedy set and listening to somebody work through their stuff and not do well. It just makes me feel like I'm not alone. Sometimes my jokes don't land, so I totally get what that is like. Oftentimes I'd go to these open mics and one of my favorite archetypes that I saw repeated over and over and over again was the white dude who was convinced that he was just so edgy and that nobody could handle it these days. Their sets often bomb because it's usually just them saying some offensive shit with no punchline and then blaming the audience for not getting it. And the thing is, these guys are never funny, but they will continue to talk about how they have all of these offensive jokes that they're afraid to share because people just can't handle it these days. Instead of acknowledging that they just weren't funny, they've got this built-in excuse. It's not that they weren't funny, it's that everyone else is just too politically correct to get it. I wish that white men would just tell the racist joke. I'm begging you, tell the racist joke. It's apparently your best material. Just tell the racist joke instead of talking about how you can't tell it. Just tell us this amazing racist joke that you're so afraid would get you canceled. Say it. I'll wait. Timothy, tell us. As an observer, I want to say that this rally call that everything is too PC these days frankly sounds like an excuse for the fact that maybe you're just not good at what you do. Like I said, I'm more goth than I am punk, and the closest I kind of get to punk is post-punk. But you know, to be honest with you guys, a lot of these like 80s punk bands wouldn't make it in 2021. Not because they're edgy, not because they're offensive, but because they fucking suck. And usually they're really, really shitty musicians. And when I say that, I of course am excluding whatever your favorite punk band may happen to be. I do not envy musicians in 2021 because we are so oversaturated with new music all the time, and our standards are super, super, super high. And I think if we're being really honest, these 80s bands would not have been able to make the cut in 2021. Punk was already kind of dead, but there are still plenty of musicians keeping the punk spirit alive. Even ones who use offensive and edgy language, but usually those artists are not mainstream. Hell, even if we do talk about mainstream music, WAP, a song where a woman asks a man to hit the dangly thing in the back of her throat, is a very, very, very popular song. At the end of the day, I keep asking myself who these comments are for. Who is Glenn Danzig trying to speak to when he says stuff like this? And I think he's trying to talk to other people who also believe that PC culture, woke bullshit, cancel culture, blah, 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 has gone too far. In a strange, almost meta way, there are a lot of people who would like to believe that their ideas are too edgy to be digested by the mainstream. And hey, for some people, that's the appeal of punk music. But at the end of the day, you're dying on a hill for lyrics like "I killed a baby today," which in 2021, if I'm being completely honest, while that's a grotesque line, it's really not that edgy because it's such an obviously offensive thing to say. You know what it reminds me of? Shock art that I would see in school, where a person would smear their shit all over the walls, and the real art was convincing other people that this is art that should be tolerated and celebrated. But people are allowed to not like your art. They're allowed to be offended by your art. They're allowed to not want anything to do with your art. They're allowed to think that you fucking suck. And I'm saying that as somebody who's been hashtag canceled several times over. I will say that there is something to be said about the mob mentality of the internet that doesn't leave a lot of room for nuance and really, really loves watching people burn. Personally, I've never really believed in throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I still own and listen to Smith's albums, even though Morrissey is a piece of shit. But come on. We live in a time where everyone has a supercomputer in their pocket, and they have never been more encouraged to create art that is meaningful, disruptive, and stands up against the system, which again is the foundation of a punk sensibility. So are you really lamenting punk or your bank account?